Okay, hello. Welcome to a second video that I'm making about one of my bits of music. I thought, given this time that we have stuck at home, I could chat about some things that I do know about, which is about writing my own music. And I had a request after the last video to write about a song called Kindness that's from my latest album, Tranquility II. Now this track, I was surprised that I was asked to do this one, perhaps because it's one of the newest ones. But at the same time, I was a bit fascinated because the last one I talked about was After the Rain, which is practically the first track I wrote for the my music, that when I'm doing this kind of style of music. And secondly, this piece was the last one I finished. Not the last one I started writing. Did another one last, but this one caused me a lot of grief in the final stages, and I'll talk about more about that later. But yeah, interesting that this was asked as a sort of request to be talked about. So my first and last track so far, and this is so far being April 2020. We're going to talk about the song Kindness. So the whole of Tranquility II album basically was kind of a look back at the original Tranquility album that I did nearly 20 years ago, about 18 years ago. And I was trying to copy the tracks that I did. I almost ripped myself off, which was an interesting experiment, quite fun to do, and to see if I can sort of do the same kind of thing but not the same. A little bit of inspiration, I suppose. One of my musical heroes was Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells. I'm a big fan of his stuff for a long time, since I was a teenager. And he wrote his very famous Tubular Bells album in 1973, or 72, it was released in 73. And he then, 20 odd years later, in the early 90s, did Tubular Bells 2. And it really kind of followed the pattern of the original album. And when I first listened to it, I was blown away. I thought it was hilarious in many ways, because it was sort of copying the music but not quite the same. So I think that's a bit of an inspiration for me to do the Tranquility II album, to try and make myself write the same music but not quite the same. Slightly updated versions. Many of the sounds and keyboard synthesizers that I use are still the same ones, to be honest. I haven't bought hundreds more because I don't really need to change the sounds. It's like you don't need to buy a different instrument for the orchestra, you just write new music for it. Anyway, so that was my thinking behind them, the tracks for Tranquility II. And this song, Kindness, wasn't named Kindness to start with. I don't know what I named it. I don't know what I named it to start with. This working title. I might find that out in a minute when I start looking at it. It was actually copying the second track that was on the Tranquility album. Here it is again. Inner Peace. Now, Inner Peace featured in it vocals from my, at that point, just about fiancée, and now my wife of 18 or 15 years, get that right, Tamzine Kimber. She was Tamzine Edwards then, if you look at the sleeve notes. But it had a vocal line, it was just an ooh effect thing. I thought, oh, it'd be fun to put her on one of the tracks, so we did. And she's a professional singer. And so I wrote this track specifically with her doing some similar kind of thing in mind. I didn't know what yet, but I just thought I'd put some oohs in as well. And it became, over the progress of the music, the sort of feature part, I suppose, when it comes in. So very much led by the vocals on this one in the end, which I'd had lots of likes and so on, and good positive comments about that track. Anyway, so I thought it would be good to do another vocal one, so that's what I did. How I actually went about writing it and finishing it was quite different, I suppose, to the other tracks, in that I completely changed it at the last minute to the final released version, but I'd liked my original version so much I put it on the album as well as a bonus track. So what you hear on the Tranquility II album are two versions of this song, Kindness, the chill out mix as I called it, and the sort of first original mix. In actual fact, the chill out mix was the first version I did. And whilst I was fiddling with it and trying to get it to sound exactly right, I was just going, this isn't quite, it's too chill out, it's not quite Tranquility that I wanted. So I stripped it right back to the bare bones and ended up with the version that you hear on the track. So I'm going to just first of all show you some of the things that I did composing it, and then I'll show you the actual files, because nowadays I've got it all, it's new stuff, it's all on the computer already, unlike my last one which is on the Atari, which is much harder to bring things up. I can show you how I put things together and what made the cut and what didn't make the cut, and so on. So first of all, on the piano, I always start on a keyboard of some description, and I wanted to copy the rhythm that overran through the original Inner Peace track. And it's this kind of tum ta 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 ta, almost like a sort of slow rumba, tum ta 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 ta, really slowed down kind of rumba rhythm, which I put in the original track. So I wanted to sort of copy that. So I tried some various percussion things and so on, but they ended up again just as a guide part, really, putting in a piano part. I might just move the camera around because you can see this better. But I started off with a piano part, emulating that rhythm as well. It went something like this. So a very simple part there, just giving that rhythm that in the middle of that. And I then fiddled around with a very simple descending bass line, something like this. I sort of fiddled around for a bit and got some ideas together of a pattern like that, and ended up writing a little sequence like that. And I began to sort of play a tune in my head with that as well, on the top of my fingers. And things began to evolve a bit, really just on this piano part, and I was kind of busking it. So then I began to write it down, and here's the manuscript that I used. Very simple, not many changes. I'm always impressed myself if I don't have many changes. There's a couple you can see on the line here, but that was the original manuscript that I wrote down, if you can see that in the camera there. So the chord sequence, very straightforward, C major again, and a very easy sort of key to play around in, and not sort of think about anything. Not that I worry too much about keys, but there's a sort of few errors or changes I made here. But very much just a simple little tune I wanted, really trying to keep it simple, because simple is what I'm after in Tranquility. I don't want complicated, fast-moving rhythms or anything like that. So very, very simple tune, which I played just on this sort of kind of piano. It's got a piano and strings, or voice sort of sound. You can hear it sustains a bit. I was just messing around on a sound like that, and it kind of stuck. I'm going to move over to the computer now, so show you some of the actual images and music, how I built it up. Okay, here we are in Cubase. Those who are familiar with that might recognise the layout of this. And here I have all the different tracks that we used. This has actually got all the MIDI tracks, and down here is the audio tracks. So I started off with just this piano part at the top, and it did start as a guide. I just thought I'll just do a quick rough guide part, just to make things sound kind of okay, and it's something like this. Which you'll be familiar with. But I was also at the time desperate to put this percussion part in that I had from the previous track. So I put in a cymbal part that went something like this. If I keep going, you'll hear a cymbal part coming in as well. So that's down here, a rhythmic cymbal part. And we also had the original drum part, which was this. Very low, sort of African drum kind of sound. Very bassy. But I was trying to update it, so I added the drum kit part. And of course you couldn't have drums without having a bass part as well, so I added the bass part. A bit of tambourine as well, I think. So that's sort of my basic for the whole track now. I had a rhythm part and I had a sort of a harmony part. So I thought, okay, that's fine. I'll put a vocal part on. I think this is the guide vocal part on a synthesizer sound. So I got the whole thing going. And so on. Fairly ghastly sound, yes. But I sort of just to give myself a little working part. So that was kind of my basics that I had. I then put some other things in because the introduction I had from the previous version, the inner piece of the introduction. So I started off with a sound from the library called Atmosphere. I think it's this one here. And it sounds something like this. At the beginning I had a kind of just sort of some strange, it's called atmospheric horns I think they're called. Oh, it's quite demonic, wasn't it? Bit of a drone. Then it comes in with this sort of descending scale. And the same way that the melody does. I've used this second. So what I'm saying there is that I had written the tune first and then did the introduction second. Doesn't always work like that, but it's often how I do. I can get a musical idea and then sort of do the beginning or maybe an ending to it as well. And I did various other parts of the introduction, as of some other vocal sounds, and I sort of synthesised the who I think that's a kind of some kind of ethnic instrument. I'm not too sure what it is, not an expert, but it's a nice sound on here. And I added these extra parts in, so you get the introduction, which I think these bits sound like this together, and a thing called Bell Vox, which is quite an interesting sound. Tinkling sound, which I've heard Vangelis use a few times on his tracks. I can hear him use that one, exactly the same sound as that I'm using here. But I've used it on a couple of tracks before. You might recognise it if you know any of my stuff. So I've got these kind of just random atmospheric sounds going on all the way through here. A few more things that you can see come in here. Hear that sort of bell vox tinkling sound, various other things happening. So it's got all these kind of sounds going on throughout it at the beginning, and then we get to this section here, the bigger section where everything comes in. You can see the vocal lines here. Now if I zoom in on those a bit, you can see we recorded it a lot in sections. In fact, I recorded 3 different parts for that. So yeah, so then I wanted to add the real vocals to it. So I printed out for my wife Tam the parts and then scribbled some sort of harmony parts underneath and said, oh, can you sing that as well? So we did a few takes. We did about 3 takes with various parts, and I think I did a lower one as well. I couldn't find the music for that one. But yes, yeah, so then I made her sing all these parts. Didn't take her long, she's so good. We did it in an hour or so. And then I sort of compiled them together. You saw on the screen all the different sections of stuff together, and I sort of put them together and blended them and changed them, put the sounds in, balanced it and so on, and put lots of sort of effects on, like, you know, reverb and stuff like that to make it sound very echoey and so on, to give you the final piece. And then as I said, I got to the mixing stage, where I wanted to sort of finish all the pieces off, and I found that I was just too busy. So what I ended up doing was taking all those lovely drum parts out and so on that I'd worked hours on getting right and finding the sounds, and when I just muted them all and just played the piano sound with the vocal sound, I thought, yeah, that's it, isn't it? That's what we want to hear. That's the relaxing sound we want to hear for an album like Tranquility. So I left it at that, and that was, yeah, it was kind of a strange moment. I was up very late at the night finishing these mixes because I wanted a deadline in November so I could get it ready for January. I think it was November or early December. I had to have it finished in order to put it into the iTunes system to get it out and available. And so I was kind of doing some late nights just to finish things off, and I was just sitting there going, this is wrong, and so on. Yeah, and then when I pulled all the percussion out, left it with the piano, it was done. So I sort of remixed it last. It wasn't on the original album mix that I had done, and that was that. But as I said, I enjoyed the sort of chill out with the drums one so much that I've been working with the drums on. When Tam recorded her part, she had the drums on. I think there's a little bit of a video somewhere else of her doing some of that session, or me showing some parts of it somewhere, and I had the drums on. So I just cut them out for the sort of main mix, and then did the whole drum chill out mix thing as well, because I liked it so much. So I hope you like both versions. I like both versions as well. The introductions, I think, are identical in them, which is perhaps a missed opportunity, but they are. Then the sort of the drum part one comes in with the vocals, and gives it a kind of a different flavour, different feel, more of a kind of contemporary, as I said, chill out feel to it all. Anyway, that's the track Kindness. I hope I haven't bored you too much with my waffling and stumbling over what I'm trying to say, but I'm hoping to give you some kind of insight into how I go about creating some of these pieces of music. Building tracks up and layering is something I've always loved doing, and that's how I kind of created this track as well. And then sort of in the end taking them all out again. Interesting. Perhaps I will do more of that kind of thing in the future, keeping it simple. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Do let me know if there's any other tracks you'd like me to talk about. See you all again. Stay safe.